Okay, well, I'd like to say good to see everybody, but maybe it's not so good because today at the United Nations, the Attorney General started to talk about the situation in Ukraine and liken it to the situation just before 1914 and just before 1939. You know, it wasn't clear what he was on about, but these two periods led to World War. We've had, and we've got at the moment from America with Biden, he's sending extra troops to NATO countries, to Poland, Latvia, Estonia, attack helicopters, surface-to-air missiles, and new bombers or old bombers are being flown into Britain. And our own, if you can call him our own, Boris Johnson's beating the drum of war. But really his policy is whatever Biden says, I'm doing the same, because he's a very, very junior partner now. And I just want to refer to a discussion that was on the radio earlier where the defense, guy, Ben Wallace, was talking to some soldiers and they were joking about how, the SAS or the equivalent beat the Russians in Crimea. And I thought, God, when was that? And it was in 1853 to 1856. This was the last time that this was like, let's look back to when we won, Britain won, kicked ass in Russia. You know, this was the Charge of the Light Brigade and a 3-year war, and thousands and hundreds of thousands died on the British side as well. But, you know, that was a war with cannon and horses. Russia today has got nuclear weapons and a modern army. So it's a different situation. But then on the other side, in Russia, on the Russian side, 900,000 troops with tanks, all onto the Russian side of the Russian border with Ukraine, but also now peacekeeping forces, Russian military, it seems, it's not that clear, have entered the southwest provinces that are sort of semi-autonomous. And so this is a really dangerous situation. Nobody knows. I don't know. Biden doesn't know. Putin doesn't know where it's going to go. But I want to sort of try and bring a political understanding to what is going on. And to do that, we have to look at the geography and step back and look at the history. Because what's going on, if you just look at the day-to-day detail, you will never make sense of it. And also half the stuff we hear, you wonder, is it true or is it lies or is it spin? You know, intelligence, as soon as you hear that, you think dodgy. So let me see if I can do a screen share. Okay. Screen share. Okay, is that all right? See that? Okay. The world today, politically and in terms of the states and the imperial powers, is different to what it was when NATO was set up in 1949. This is a map from 1949. And what's clear is that there's two sides. On the Western side, the blue, that's all the NATO countries. And there's the controlling NATO country across the pond, if you like, in America. If you look at the middle bit, you can see West Germany, East Germany. There was a wall, the Berlin Wall, and the whole of that Europe was divided. And on the right-hand side, the eastern side, all in red, that's the Warsaw Pact. That's the USSR, the Soviet Union's military, reach. And there was a division of the world, and we had Washington on one side and Moscow on the other. But if you look at NATO today, it is different. This is a NATO a situation that changed radically after 1990, when the what was the USSR and the Warsaw Pact collapsed. Although it didn't just collapse economically and politically, there was also the fact of a popular rising. But when the old Soviet Union collapsed, Yeltsin did do and come to an understanding with the Western leaders that NATO would not expand anymore. But if you look at that map, on the left, you can see Germany, now a united country, and then Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria. Right down the bottom is Greece. All of those countries are in NATO, and at the top, Lithuania and Latvia. That means they've got missiles, missile bases and troops from the West, NATO troops or American troops along all of those borders. And then you can see to the right, slightly different color, there's Belarus at the top. There are Russian troops in Belarus, and the Ukraine. And the Ukraine is the disputed territory, the disputed country, the place where all of these East and West conflict is concentrated. At the very bottom where the Black Sea is, there is a part, the Crimea actually is now part and was annexed as part of Russia. And there is some provinces down there, as I mentioned earlier, in the southwest, the Donetsk region, that are semi-autonomous or autonomous. But if you look at that map, it's not just that NATO and NATO's forces came in and moved up. It's also the case that there is an arc of instability where there has been war and conflict in the last 15, 20 years. If you go to the very bottom, you've got Armenia and Azerbaijan. There's been 2 wars there. The first one, the Armenians won, if you can call it one, 30,000 people died. But just recently in 2020, there was an uprising and the Azeris went to war and they won, and there's another 7,000 dead. If you just go up in Georgia, there was Georgia declared for the West and the Russian army invaded, and there was a war there. And then if you go up to Moldova, where's Moldova? Can't see Moldova here. There was a conflict in Moldova. I think it's not concentrated enough on the map to see it. And then you've got the Ukraine, where there was conflict and war in 2014. And now we've got, Moldova, yeah, look, sorry, to the left of Ukraine. We've now got the current war. So this is a situation where you can see there is the border between really what you can still say is the East and the West, the Russian forces and the Western forces. And there has been a whole series of wars and instability there. But just say a bit more about the Ukraine. Hey, we could have a meeting just on the history of the Ukraine. There's a massive political history. But I just want to talk about 2 things about the Ukraine. You know, first of all, the word Ukraine means the place of the border. It really means it's a buffer state between the East and the West. And in, if you like, 20th century history, there was in the 1930s from Russia an invasion into Ukraine led by Stalin in order to provide food from the Ukrainian breadbasket to feed the Russian army, which was getting ready to fight, if they were going to fight, against the German army. So Stalin invaded from the east, and 3 million Ukrainians starved to death in a starvation to feed the Russian war machine. But you know, later on in the early 1940s, from the west, Hitler and the German army invaded from the west, and that led to the death, and they killed 7 million Ukrainians. 900,000 Jews died. So whether it's in a force from the east or from the west, you can see Ukraine is in the middle. It's a border state, and there has been a whole number of conflicts fought in that country that were really the great powers fighting in Ukraine for their great power, authority and leadership. Bit about Putin's history of Ukraine, which is fairly incredible, because he's come out and basically says, when it comes to the Ukraine, the Tsar, the Russian Tsar of the 19th century, you know, like the King of Russia, the Tsar was good. The Tsar ruled over a Russian empire which was called and was a prison house of nations. All the other nations were subservient to the Russian dominance. And Putin also says that Stalin was good. Stalin, who brought back the prison house of nations and the oppression and exploitation that went with him, but For Putin, Lenin was bad. Lenin was about revolution. He says, Putin, that Lenin betrayed the cause of Russia. So what's all that about? Because Lenin and the Bolsheviks are in our tradition. Lenin and the Bolsheviks were the leadership, the political leadership of a mass workers' movement that brought down the Tsar and ended World War I and set up a Soviet workers' state in 1917. But one of the political drives of Lenin and the Bolsheviks and the new Russia as it was that there would be offer self-determination to any country or people who chose to do that, and that there would be no what you call Russian chauvinism, meaning Russia's the best language, your language and your culture is inferior. Interesting about that demand, because we would say today that not only should Ukrainians be allowed to speak Ukrainian, but so should Russians be able to speak Russian, because there are many Russians who live in Ukraine, and there are many bilingual households and people, and there is a move by the Ukrainian government to say only Ukrainian should be spoken. Now, our tradition that I very quickly mentioned there with Lenin and the Bolsheviks is one that is rejected not only by Putin, but also by others, if you like, on the left. And it's what distinguishes and sets us apart, because we are revolutionary socialists in that tradition, the tradition of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Now, I've ended my screen there because I've tried to say that Ukraine and the war drive, there are two camps, one to the east and one to the west, but we're not in either camp. Think of it like a boxing match. If there's two boxers fighting, it's not that you either back this boxer or that boxer. You can say, hey, we don't want boxing. I'm not against boxing as a sport. Personally, I don't like it. We don't want the wars that come out of this inter-imperialist conflict. So what we say, and there's a really good little video if you haven't seen it by SWP, by Tomasz, and the demands that we come up with at the end is no to the West's war drive, NATO troops out of Eastern Europe, fight all of the imperialists and their system, Russian troops get out of the Ukraine. Now, the order that we say that in is very important, because we live in Britain, we live in the West. We've got Boris Johnson, and the key ally is Biden. So for us, we can't change what goes on in Russia, but we can have a say in fighting against our own rulers and their power here in Britain. So we follow in a tradition that goes back to those revolutionary socialists who opposed World War I. The main enemy is at home. Karl Liebknecht, Rosa Luxemburg, John McClane and others put forward this position. So we don't start with Russia out, we start with the West war drive. Hey, if we lived in Moscow, we might do the whole thing upside down. We'd say no to Putin's war, Russian troops out of Ukraine, no to NATO troops out of Eastern Europe. But we start where we are in Britain, and therefore the main enemy is home, and therefore no to the West war drive. But we say we're against imperialism. What do we mean by imperialism? Because imperialism, if you go right back, started with Rome and the Roman Empire. That's where the word imperialism gets its name. And the Roman state had military might, and they conquered the world, most of the world, including bits of Britain. But with the development of capitalism from the 16th century, you have states that are economic entities. And with the development of capitalism, you have the development of a nation state, which at its base is struggling to compete with others and to expand economically and geographically. The best way, and the pioneer in this imperial project, if you like, the first imperialism, was Britain. Naval power into the Atlantic, controlled the waves, took guns and to Africa, started the slave trade, and expanded the British Empire. It became then not Britain, but Great Britain, you know, where the you know, the sun never set and the blood never dried. That imperial expansion isn't a political or personal choice of the leaders. It is an outcome of the economic and geopolitical competition of nation states in a world economy. There's never only one nation state or one superpower. There was a time actually when some of the American leaders thought there was only one superpower, and they declared the end of you know, world history and a unipolar world. But Russia, that was beaten back in terms of its empire in the 1990s, re-established economic and then political and military strength under Putin with oil and gas, and developed a military strength way smaller than America, but significant in terms of who led it and its location. So that's that's the situation of imperial conflict today. The Russian Empire and the American Empire, with NATO and the European Union and all their, you know, allied and fellow states, are locked head to head along that dividing region in what Russians called our near borders, you know. But there are now not only the West, led by NATO and America and Britain, and also a reconstituted Russia, nowhere near as powerful as it was when it had the Warsaw Pact, but there are also other world powers, China, and other smaller powers that have become much stronger, India, you know, Vietnam, Japan, Brazil. So we don't any longer live in a world like the one that I showed in the first slide, which was, you know, the Russian bear and the Western eagle, and the world divided in two. So the slogan that we developed as a political explanation and guide for when we were founded as a Socialist Workers' Party, previously the International Socialism, which was neither Washington nor Moscow, it informs what we say today, but it's not the whole picture, because there's not only Washington and Moscow, there's also China, and it's a very complicated sort of situation with geopolitical rivalries in a number of different arenas. The Central European arena, but also the South China Sea. So I just want to say then finally, yeah, I can do that finally. What do other people say about what's going on? And when I say other people, I mean on the left, because there are people on the left who, in Britain, who say and support Putin, because the West's horrible. Look at what the West has done, their war crimes over the years. Look at NATO. It fought in Somalia, in Yugoslavia, in Libya, in Kuwait, 700,000 troops sent to Kuwait, all NATO wars, and also the latest one, 20 years of war in Afghanistan. So some people say, well, we don't like that NATO, we support Putin. Some of these people are young people who have red flags in the YCL, Young Communist League, and you may have seen them and not even realized on some of the local protests that we've had recently. We are not politically in agreement with them siding with one camp, the Russian camp. But there's others on the left. Starmer, I know some people might say he's not on the left, but Starmer, what does he say? He says, whatever Boris Johnson says, I'm in agreement, but Johnson should have done it sooner and should have done it harder. And he is an absolute supporter of NATO. But there are others that are genuinely on the left. Paul Mason, I don't know if you read, it's worth reading his latest analysis. He says that in this conflict, it's between NATO and the Russian forces. NATO is the progressive military alliance. NATO no longer, says Paul Mason, is an imperial. It's now post-imperial. I'm not quite sure when this was, because NATO armies only just left Afghanistan about 9 months ago. So pretty quickly it's developed into, it's no longer an imperialist venture. I don't quite know how he works that out. And it's getting ready for another, maybe another war, a NATO war over or in the region. NATO is not a force for progressive good and change. It is a Western military war machine. But I want to add something else to it, and that is that the NATO political leadership of Biden and America and the supporters in the West, mainly UK, but others, have lost a major war, a NATO war, a 20-year NATO war in a very poor country, Afghanistan. But also America is in economic decline, and its political and cultural influence is also in decline. And in this situation, Biden, a president that hasn't been able to deliver at home, wants to be able to show something, and therefore it's not like the American leaders at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And it's a much more unstable situation. So there is an added uncertainty around what we face at the moment. So what about us in the Socialist Workers' Party? What do we say and what do we argue? Well, who do we support? Well, we do not support either camp. We do not support our own rulers, and we do not support our own rulers' enemies. We support the people of the world, the people of the region, the people of Ukraine. Hey, you might think, hey, that sounds really cheesy. How can you do, what does that mean? But you know, there's in all of the description of what's gone on in that whole region over a historical period, the last 50 years or so, there's also often talk about how the Berlin Wall fell, how the Soviet Union disintegrated. But it didn't disintegrate on its own. The Berlin Wall did not fall down because it was rotten. It fell down because thousands of people marched and pushed it down. And there was a whole series of uprisings and popular risings in 1989 sort of time all across the former Russian-controlled or Russian orbit states, and there was people's revolutions. But in Ukraine itself, we can see there's many examples from history, but I'm only going to talk about one, and that was in 1990, where students and young people occupied one of the main squares in the capital, Maidan, and they were arguing and demanding more liberalization and more rights and more reforms. And the state sent in the forces, the police, to attack them, and the students and youth fought back, and it went on, and there was a stalemate until the workers at what was the biggest factory, called the Arsenal factory, walked out on strike and marched to the Maidan to join the students and support them, shouting, "Arsenal, Arsenal," the name of their factory. The government backed down and offered some minor reforms. But after that, the political leaders of that movement came out and supported the European Union and said, we want to be part of the European Union. And so the movement from below that had a potential to bring about a substantial and genuine social progressive change was, if you like, deflected into supporting one camp or the other. And that is something that has been disastrous. So to just conclude, and I know we're going to go into breakout rooms and discuss this, and I know there's so much I haven't said and other people have got things to say, but I just want to restate what we in Socialist Worker are saying, and what's on a very good little video that Thomas has put out. I think I referenced this earlier, which is "No to the West War Drive. NATO troops out of Eastern Europe. Fight all of the imperialists and their system. Russian troops out of the Ukraine." I'll leave it there and look forward to meeting up and talking about more in a bit. Thank you, comrades.